Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Strength and Weakness podcast. I am Morgan, one of your co hosts, along with Ellen. We are excited to be with you today. And today we are talking about what a parent's role is in their child's faith journey. And I am feeling particularly excited to talk about this because I am currently reading a book called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. And
Mm,
this is kind of the premise of the whole book. What is parent's role in their faith journey? What have we been promised previously from, previous leaders, society that we've heard that, okay, if I'm a good Christian parent, here's where my child should end up, and then Ellen, you have a lot of this lived experience in your therapy practice.
mhm.
And so today we're going to unpack that a little bit. And we are going to talk through, what that means. And if there's any insight that Ellen can share with us from seeing this firsthand, and we'll go from there. How does that sound, Ellen?
Sounds great. I'm excited.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm excited because I do see this a lot in my therapy practice. And I do think this is something that Christian parents are dealing with. And I see a lot of heartbreak from parents misunderstanding their role in their child's faith journey.
Yeah.
And not only is it creating heartbreak between them and their children, between a lot of times between them and their spouse, between them and their own understanding of their role as a Christian parent, but also most devastatingly between them and God. Because a lot of times parents move this onto God, right? They feel disillusioned with not just their parenting, their child's journey, but also their faith and their God. So, really, this is so important because it affects so many different pieces of Christian parents' lives. So, I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I feel like for me, being a parent of young children, the reason I even picked this book up and started this conversation was because I'm like, well, what role do I want to play in my kids' Christian walk? And
Right.
what is my role? And it was interesting because I think having grown up in the 90s where focus on the family, that's what I was raised on, and I was raised on this
Mhm.
understanding of like, if you train your child in the way they should go, then they will be a Christian when they grow up. And so even during my college years when I was dating women, right? Like I felt in some respect a failure because I'm like, well,
Right.
I I thought my parents were told that if they train me in the way I should go, then I should never, go away from
Yeah.
that. And so I think all of that, I was like, well, what am I raising? Me and my husband, like, what are we raising our children and like what is the framework that we're trying to bring them up in, and it has just kind of led me on this path of like, well, what is my role, and then what is my role with God, what is my role with my spouse, and then how do I communicate that to
Mm.
my kids so that they can see a real authentic picture of God and go on that journey for themselves because that is their faith journey. And I am just a part in it, a really important part, right? But like I am just a part in that. So I'm excited to
That's
hear
right.
from you, kind of like unpacking really those like three pillars, if you will, um, as we
Mhm.
dive into the conversation. So I guess my first question to you, Ellen, is like when a parent comes in, to have this conversation with you, where do you usually start in unpacking it?
Well, honestly, a lot of parents usually come in total and complete panic because their child is living in a way that their faith wouldn't agree with. And so there's a lot of fear and a lot of grief. We try to work through that fear and that grief in order to gain some clarity because we can't make good decisions when we're just inundated by fear and grief. But I think as we start piecing apart that fear and grief, the fear is often tied to distortions, right? Lies that we believe as true, distortions around what our role is as parents. And I think the grief is often tied to those distortions as well. We had this expectation. And I grew up in a faith culture that I don't think that anyone ever said this blatantly, but the kind of what was felt, the culture was parents owned their child's faith, not just
Yes.
their faith journey, but their faith outcome. Right? Your child, whether they become a Christian or not by the age of 18 at the latest, probably, right? Determines whether you are doing what you should have done as a Christian parent. And if they're not a Christian, you're obviously a bad Christian parent. You might look like a good Christian on the outside, but clearly there's some sin happening in your home if your child doesn't become a Christian by 18. Well, I didn't become a Christian at 18. So I felt that same sort of burden on my shoulders, right? I'm not just letting my God down, I'm letting my parents down because people are now going to shame them and have, wrong beliefs about them and their parenting and their love for God and for me because I'm not a Christian. So I think, yeah, we need to kind of dispel that myth for sure. I'm interested in this book that you said. I love that. But I think it all boils, well, not all, but I think a lot of it boils down to that Proverbs 22:6, train a child in the way they should go. When they're older, they won't depart from it. I think I've heard a little bit of reorientation around that scripture in the past 10 to 20 years. Before, I think people took it very literally. Train a child in the way they should go, and then they'll become a Christian by the time they're 18. Like that's how people
Yeah.
interpreted that, right? Obviously, that's not right. I think the slight, differentiation I've heard in the past 10 to 20 years is, well, this isn't so much a formula, this is a principle, right? If you train them in the way that they should go, then they'll have the foundation of truth and hopefully they'll stick to that. But I think what's really interesting, I just, learned this not too long ago that uh, if you read the Hebrew, we're really at such a loss as Western English speakers reading in modern English, Western readers reading an ancient Eastern text in a different language. Like nothing has made me feel more like a true Gentile who has just been graciously grafted into God's family with no like no reason for it, then starting to begin to understand God and the Bible from a more Eastern Jewish perspective, because the way that they layer their language is just doesn't come across in the English, right?
Yeah.
So the way that the Hebrew is written in the Bible in Proverbs 22:6, it is literally translated as train a child. Let me see, I have it somewhere. Train a child, something like train a child in his way. And most Jewish scholars that I've heard translate that to train a child according to his own way, as in get to know your child, study them, become a student of them, and then meet them where they're at. Train them in that way, right? Don't try
Yeah.
to force them out of a box that God created them in.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, there are some Jewish scholars that would believe that means train them in God's way, right? But I think to me, knowing God's nature, understanding what it feels like to be a parent, it certainly makes a lot of sense to me that God would be saying, get to know your child and then meet them there. And from there, teach them about me and my
Yeah.
ways. And if you cultivate who they are, train them in that vein, then you will be building something from the ground up and it will be harder for them to lose their identity as they move through life, right?
Right.
So to me, that makes a lot more sense. And dispelling that myth, that particular myth about Proverbs 22:6, might change how we go about this question: what is a parent's role?
Totally. And I think I even have like a lived experience with that as I'm raising my kids, right? Where it's like my daughter experienced, she just had to read about Jesus being an advocate and a rescuer to be broken hearted. Like, just like, I
Mm,
cannot believe he would do that. And just, she felt so seen and loved in that. My middle son,
mm.
who's 6, read the same story and was like, okay, but like, God as like his warrior and his fighter, and like he just has
Mm.
such more of like a combative spirit. He was born in an hour, if that gives you any inclination to
Oh
like
my.
how he enters and views the world.
His Fast and Furiousness, yeah.
And so then it's like, it's so interesting because as he's getting older, he sees like he's afraid. Like there was the other night, he was really afraid and he's like, but God will protect me because he's my protector. Like he sees God
Oh,
so much more in that perspective. And I'm
righty.
like, and if I would try to be like, but Jesus is your rescuer and Jesus is your advocate, like it just doesn't resonate the same. And I think that's what makes
Yeah,
God so beautiful is like he is so many things and so different to all of us. Like he stays the same, but how we experience him is very, very like
that's
personal.
right.
And I think that even to me, it even takes away like their personal faith journey with God and how God is trying to speak to them. Um,
Mhm.
because I always think about the Old Testament and I'm like, but there were 8-year olds, 10-year olds that God was speaking to directly. And like, I couldn't imagine. being one of those parents and being like, God didn't really talk to you. I am the one
Mm,
who's showing you who God is, right? And I do think, right, like very much generationally, like we teach our kids, but I never want to be the one that discounts, like, well, what if my daughter is hearing God's voice telling her X, Y, or Z? I
yeah.
think it takes that experience away from them from having that experience with God.
Yes, not trying to fit them in our box, right? How
Correct.
we experience God, but letting them have their own. And that does require a lot of adaptability on our part as parents. But I think that really is such a fundamental foundational shift of it's not if I do everything right, my child will be saved. And that puts way too much power in the hands of the parent. We just don't
Yes.
have control over the outcome of our child's faith. Now, we do have a lot of influence for sure,
Yes. Yeah.
especially in the earlier years, right? I do think in the trajectory of parenting and development that I see, you and I have younger kids, right? We have a lot more influence on our child's understanding of God, journey toward faith. We have a lot more influence than the preteen and the teenage years, right? The parents who are navigating those years. So I do think that there's kind of this shift in parenting where we got to go hard in the early years,
Yeah.
get to know them, help to build their understanding of God according to their own way, according to their own perspective and worldview. And then we need to like kind of ease off the gas slowly, teaching them as we do once they get into the preteen, teenage years, teaching them how to make wise decisions.
Yeah.
It's not do everything right and my child will be saved. It doesn't matter what stage of parenting you're in. It's my role is to know my child, meet them honestly, and guide them wisely throughout any stage of development that I find them in or that they're in. And we need to alter that based on their stage of development. That comes into play with knowing them well. We have to know in this stage of development, this is what they need from me. In this stage, this is what they need from me. And in order to do that well as parents, we have to have moments of reflection, which means we have to slow down our life, prune what we can so that we have the time and the space internally and externally in our schedule and in our own hearts to evaluate, to reevaluate, to analyze and see, all right, my child's now thinking in this way. How do I need to alter my parenting to meet them where they're at now?
Yeah. And I often think about how much time parents spent with their kids when they used to have
Mm,
to walk everywhere, and
yeah.
how much time they spent just talking and flushing out some of these deep ideas. And it has I used to hate the commute that I have with my kids. Right now we drive somewhere between 28 and 37 minutes going to school. On a bad
Oh
day it
my.
could get to 40. But
Ooh.
it's so interesting because I was like, oh man, I hate this drive. I hate this drive. I hate this drive. And then I like took a step back and
Mhm.
had to like reframe my perspective through a lens of gratitude.
Mhm.
And I realized such incredible conversations happen in those moments because it's just a
Mhm.
chance to be we're in traffic, we're moving slowly. My kids are just thinking, they're just like in the car, like we're listening to a devotional, it's prompting some thinking. The devotional isn't even usually where the conversation comes from. It's usually after that, or like the snuggling at bedtime when all the thoughts are rushing to their mind, and like I can so
Mhm.
quickly want to be like, I just want to get bedtime over with. Like, just get me.
Girl, I feel you on that one. I'm like, I am 15 minutes away from freedom. Get to bed.
Yes. But then my daughter is like, well, mommy, like, you know, she talks about all kinds of things. But asks me all these deep questions.
Same.
And I have to stop and be like, this is the pace
Mhm.
in which I get to train my child's heart. I get
That's
to
right.
hear where their heart's at. Like, because otherwise, I was just thinking about this yesterday. Otherwise, between getting them up and out of the house for breakfast, picking them up and trying to figure out what kind of mood they're in coming home from school, none of that, there's no deep conversations. Like, we are surviving. We are doing like the basic necessities of like get to school, get home from school, get a snack, get dinner, get bedtimes, get showers, like
Yeah,
you're just in it. So
totally.
I do think that there is the slowing down and the being able to like really know and hear your child is so critical. and meeting them
Yeah.
developmentally. I think that is something I have started to hear a lot more. And even to like, I think about the conversations we have with parents who have teens, it can just be like, oh, but why are they doing this? Blah. And I'm like, if you understood developmentally, like, this is all making sense. They're trying to figure life
Mhm.
out. They're having these big feelings, big thoughts. Like, it makes sense when we can remove our box, our outcome, like the shame we would feel if it turned out negatively and really just met them where they're at. I think it just takes a lot of
Yeah.
the pressure off of us as well. But Ellen, I have a question, like kind of shifting a little bit away from like the persona of the parent. How, or I guess the parent child relationship, have you seen this impact the parent to God or like individual to God distortion? Because I
Yeah.
want to touch on that and then how that also translates to like your partner. It seems like right, we're talking a lot about parent to child, but I do also see it, impacting those two purviews as well.
I would say what I see most frequently is first and foremost shame. I see shame so much in parents who come in and they're like, essentially, I did everything I was supposed to. I brought them to church. I brought them to a midweek service. I went to the kids' Bible study. I did devotionals. I did this. I did that. I did everything I was supposed to do. And I find that most people stop it there and it looks like shame towards self. And I think a lot of parents do feel that way. And that shame manifests sometimes in being afraid to talk to other parents about this. They don't want other people to know what they're going through because they feel like they weren't good parents, apparently, right? They're just finding this out and they're afraid of what other people will think of them. But I find what a lot of parents don't say, but still feel, like what they kind of infer with their emotion, but what they don't actually say out loud is, I did everything I was supposed to do. And now God has let me down, right? Like, no one has ever said that to me. I think a few people have probably said it, but rarely do people say it, but I think always they feel it. I did everything I was supposed to do,
Yeah.
and now God has let me down. And I think they in their fear, they don't know where else to go, so they're like, "I'm still here, God. Tell me what to do to turn this ship around."
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times I tell people, "You're putting all of your focus into trying to change the behavioral outcome, like the
Right.
behavior of your child." And I get that. I get hoping for that. You don't have control over that because usually I'm talking to parents whose children are a little bit older in adulthood or even late teen years. And so I just kind of tell them it might be time to let it all fall apart. Like,
Yeah.
let's mourn it. Let's stop trying to prevent. Let's mourn, see where the pieces lie, and then let's go from there. And usually in that space, then we can crawl up into God's lap and grieve with him because he also grieves over your child's journey or, them not coming to him. He grieves over that even more than we do as parents.
Yeah.
So somehow shifting that perspective to I'm grieving in front of God because he's let me down
And
and I feel all this shame. I must have done something wrong and I didn't know. To now I'm grieving alongside God and we both mourn over the lack of control that we have in my child's life. There's something about that companionship with God that really changes this experience for parents. And I think it's really important and foundational and needs to happen quickly.
yeah. Yeah. And man, nothing is more relatable than what you just said. I don't know how many other parents, need to hear that, but I definitely, as my kids are getting older and even just life experiences are happening, like if grief is not a companion, like you're
Yeah.
just going to keep holding on until you burst. If you're trying to make your kid happy all the time, if you're trying to protect them from everything, I think I have learned so much that there is this really hard beauty of like, I am going to be experiencing grief constantly, whether that is listening to my daughter having friendship problems and wanting to be a mama bear and be like, oh my gosh, but
Mhm.
then also having to like, yeah, God, she's learning really hard friend relationship
Yeah.
moments. Um, I just think that there is such a clarity that sometimes I think as Christians we want to avoid. And that's again in this book, shout out to I don't even know who the author is, but there is this idea of like big happy family, nothing can be wrong. You just have to like keep
Yeah.
smiling and keep going. And it's like that is not farther from the truth. Like,
Yeah.
I
And that's not real faith. It's certainly not what we see in the Bible, representative of real,
yes.
true, authentic faith.
Just today, I was thinking about the story about Abraham, and I'm like, what was Abraham feeling while he was walking Isaac up the mountain? Because it was a multi-day trip. It wasn't just like, hey, we're just going up
Mhm.
this one day. And I'm like, that must have been really hard days. There was no way he was like, well, let's go up this mountain. He knew what was going to be happening. And I just was
Yeah.
thinking about that, and I was like, because I was listening to the song Same God, and it talks a lot about like the same God as Moses, the same God as David, the same God who answered all of these prayers is the same God
Yeah.
who is with us now. And I'm like, wow, Abraham was I just let my imagination go, and I was like, he had to have been like, God, like why? Like help me
Mhm.
understand. And this is somebody who spoke to God face to face. And I'm like, geez, I could imagine that is such a bigger ask than like what I'm asking God, what that feels like. But all of that to say, I do think that there is just this freedom in being able to step into the messy middle that we always talk about of like, this is hard, there is grief. And I think the sooner we can get a clearer perspective of what life on this side of heaven, it is broken and we need God, the sooner we can like let our children live, still influence, still do our best, but like let them have their own faith journey rather than trying to
Yeah.
put them into this box and make it look this exact way because that is not going to be real life for them either.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like this, you were saying, help me understand how much more must have Abraham felt that in that moment. And we feel that all the time as parents too, especially when we feel like our children aren't walking toward God in the way that we expected or hoped that they would. I like to remind parents of a few things. One, my journey to God was not very, steady, right? Like, it wasn't like
Linear.
A plus
Yeah.
B equals yeah, it wasn't very linear, thank you. It was pretty messy and bumpy at that, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think we can expect even if our children are raised in church with a great foundation of who God is,
Yeah.
we can't expect that their journey to God will be any different. And I say journey to God because it's not like this, you're not there and then all of a sudden you're there. It takes a journey. Like think of the
Yeah.
prodigal son, right? He went on this journey, and every milestone on that journey, although it looked worse and worse and worse, sleeping with the pigs, eating the slop, squandering the wealth,
Yeah.
it looked like it was getting worse. It actually, in his heart, probably what God saw is great. He's getting closer to seeing the real truth, to
Yeah.
coming back to me, right? Now, as human parents, we can't see that, but God does see that whole picture. So
Yeah.
when we're crawled up in his arms grieving, he is grieving just like we are. He is not afraid or ruffled like we are. I think one, because he sees the heart level that we don't see. But two, again, I have to bring up that we are Western, modern English readers on an Eastern ancient text. And we just don't understand God the way that we think we do.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I mean, I'm like literally just scratching the very surface on trying to understand God from a more Eastern Jewish perspective, and I'm realizing how wrong I was taught almost everything about the Bible and Jesus's experience. Now that said,
Yeah.
God is still God. He is still good. I am still saved,
Yeah.
right? Like nothing foundational has changed, but
Yeah.
the depth of understanding is way different than the quick, shallow truths that I was given from an, modern Western perspective. So I think we have to be really humbled by that
Yeah.
as parents, as what I call parents to be surrendered stewards of their children's journey. And I think we have this idea of what salvation is and isn't, what it looks like, what it should and shouldn't look like, and what our children's eternal status will or will not be according to their behavior on earth.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I'm not sure we can stand so firmly on that. Now, I don't have the theological background to say, this is what is true about salvation. And if you do X, Y, and Z, then this means you'll be here for eternity. I don't think anyone probably has the theological background to definitively say that. All I can say is I read what the Bible says, and because of my love for God, I want to do it.
Yeah.
And I think we have to say the same for our children that we're going to be surrendered stewards. We're going to do our very best standing in the gap for God with our kids. But apart from that, we don't know their eternal status and the exact formula that means or looks like.
Yeah.
And so there is a piece of our own surrender here before God, sitting in his lap as his children, saying, I don't understand, just like Abraham. But instead of, I don't understand, help me understand, I must understand because it's my
And
job
I
to save
must be
my
in
kid.
control.
Right. That is not the right heart to have. The right heart is, I don't understand, but you do. And I sit at your feet or in your arms, and I trust that you love my kid even more than I do. I'm doing my best to stand in the gap. That's what you've called me to. That's my role. That's all I have control over.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of grief in this. Once we grieve, then we can get to a place of acceptance. And in that space of acceptance, then we can surrender. Surrender does not mean giving up, it means accepting what is in and what is not in your control. You don't have control over your child's eternal destination,
Yeah.
but you do have control over your role as a surrendered steward in their life.
Yeah. I think you're so right, Ellen. And I think what I'm kind of taking away from our conversation today is like there just has to be a willingness to like let go, which I think from a Western perspective is really hard. We're in control of our health. We're in control of like, I can make anything happen. That deeply
Mm,
resonates with me. I'm like, I can make it happen. Here we go. And during the season of Lent, I have been stripped of all of my control. I have
mm,
multiple situations happening right now that like I have no control over, and I have never felt more than now like, wow, I just have to let God be God, and like I can't make things happen.
mm,
And I think more specifically with our children, like what is my role in my kids' faith journey is a lot of standing on the sidelines and along with God, being able to like help guide them and direct them and lead them and understanding who God made them to be, because it is different than who He made me to
mhm.
be, and how we can help them, get to know God the best way possible. Um, so thanks for helping
Yeah.
guide us and
Well,
unpack that.
I think the role depends, like we said in the beginning, on the child's developmental stage. Earlier, like with our kids who are a little bit younger, our role is we get to exercise a little bit more influence. Again, not control over their ultimate faith journey where they end up in their faith, but we do have a lot more influence. And so we need to be really pouring into that, meeting them where they're at, becoming their student, learning about them, and then from there, teaching them about God in a way that resonates with them. That will continue to morph as they get older. But yeah, I always refer to the parable of the talents, right? If parents say broadly, generally, what is my role in my child's faith journey? I would say to be a surrendered steward, just like the parable of the talents. If we're going to think about it through that lens, the Matthew 25 talks about this parable of the talents. Each servant was entrusted with something very valuable that ultimately belonged to the master, not to them.
Mm,
They were held accountable for how they stewarded what they were given, how they engaged, their faithfulness, their willingness to act, but they were not judged on their ability to control the outcome. And I think that's where this connects so directly with parenting, that the outcome of our child's life, their choices, their faith, that is not fully in our control. We have to surrender that, not give it up, not care about it. That's impossible.
yeah.
But we have to realize that it's not within our control, and we have to mourn that with God. But then we have to realize that God has given them agency just as he's given us agency. And so we have to respect that free will, and we can influence, but we can't take control. And the way that we steward them, the love we offer them, the truth we speak, the posture we take, the integrity we walk in with them, those are the things that we are responsible for as parents. I think that we'll be held accountable to them on Judgment Day. I don't think we'll be sitting before God on Judgment Day and God will say, your kid didn't become a Christian by 18, you're going down,
Right,
right?
right.
Let's put that elevator down. No, I think he'll say, wait a minute, you walked in faith in this situation, but you walked in fear in this situation. Let's talk through that, right? So I think we're going to
Yeah.
be judged more for how we faithfully and surrenderedly steward our children, not the outcome of their faith.
Yeah. Wow. So rich. Thanks, Ellen.
I do want to cover one more thing, Morgan. Sorry.
Please.
I think any parent listening to this, at least that I've worked with, would probably have this question listening to this podcast at this point. But what if my kid doesn't become a Christian?
Yeah.
Like, great, but what if they don't, right? Like, great, I'll be a surrendered student. I'll work through my fear. I'll grieve. I'll whatever. But what if they don't become a Christian? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Morgan?
Oh, geez. I don't know if I have any thoughts in the sense of like, you can't make your kid become a Christian. Like,
Yeah.
I can't make my child become a Christian, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know. What would your response be?
Yeah, I love that. You're right, you can't. Unfortunately, you just don't have control over that. You have to grieve it, you have to surrender it, you have to be a steward, not a controller, right? Not an
Yeah.
owner. But I think I we have a mutual friend, Dr. Jennifer Konzen, and she said something once that just blew my mind. It's so simple, but it's so profound. She was like, "At the end of the day, with my own children, I had to get to a place where it's just me and God." Right? And I think that is the ultimate role of a steward is in the roles that you've been entrusted with, you're going to act wisely, wholeheartedly, you're going to do your very best even if it's imperfect. But we're not just a steward of our children's faith and their life. We are also God's child, just as our children are our children.
Yeah.
We are God's children. And so I think we need to remember that that is our primary responsibility, our primary
Mm,
attachment, our primary connection is with us and God. And so, of course, one of our greatest hopes as Christian parents is to help our children really know and fall in love with God. Notice I didn't say anything about behavior, right? Our main goal as Christian parents is to help our children know and fall in love with God. But at the end of the day, before we are our children's parent, we are God's child. And so I think we have to also equally or even more so invest in that connection to remember that all we have control over is our connection with God. And from that space, we can steward whatever God has put in our responsibility. But we always have to touch base with that foundational truth that we are God's children first.
yeah.
So that's what I would say to that.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks for unpacking that for us, Ellen. I mean, I love doing this podcast, but more so, I love learning. And I think your experience and lived practice in your profession is always such a helpful vantage point. So we hope you enjoyed our podcast today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.